So my name is Zoe Lewis. I'm the director of the Leadership Coaches. I love what I do. I help people become their very best and I help organisations excel. It's the stuff that we do to make sure that we're able to lead our people in a way that encourages what we call resonance. And some of you who have come across emotional intelligence before will know what that means. Resonance is where we really connect with people, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. I head up an organisation called the Leadership Coaches, which I know some of you know about. So there are 16 excellent coaches who work alongside me all over the UK, but we operate all over the world, so we've got a global reach, especially with tools such as Zoom. As we go through today, we're going to be recording this session, so anything that we cover will not be too deep and too personal because I don't want you to have to reveal anything that's going to be recorded and taken out there. I'm very much about keeping your psychological safety, so even if we do any activities, you won't be asked to reveal anything personal as we go through today. So I hope that alleviates any early stage fear. Now I'm going to ask you to either keep your camera on or your camera off in whichever way is comfortable for you, because I've heard of Zoom fatigue. People are fed up of having their cameras on and thinking, does my face look okay? Actually, I'm going to just go down here and get a drink. Whatever works for you, just go with it today. In terms of question and answers, we've got a section at the end for that. So if I can ask you to either put them in the chat box, and then we'll be monitoring that as we go through. And also we'll host a question and answer session just as we get towards the end. If there's any urgent, pop that in the chat box as well. Chris is thankfully watching and making sure if there's any technical issues, if I suddenly go quiet, things like that, he'll pick that up for us. Okay, so let's just get started and understand a bit more about what we're going to be covering today. So we're going to have a look at what is emotional intelligence, and you've probably seen and heard the phrase EI, so the abbreviated version. We're going to understand a little bit more about what emotional quotient is, which is the measure of emotional intelligence, EQ. We're going to talk about why is this important, especially now. What impact is this having for us? And how does EI impact you, others, and the organisation that you work with? I've got 3 tools that you can take away that's available in a workbook that you're going to be able to use, and then you can work on how do I improve and work on my own emotional intelligence. So I'd like this to be something that you can actually practically work on and take that forward as well. And then to start to consider how you cast your leadership shadow and how EI enhances this. So we're going to get started by doing something called a true and false. So what we're going to do here is a bit of true and false, a little bit of learning around emotional intelligence. So we hear this term emotional intelligence, which is referring to our awareness of ourselves, awareness of others, and how we use that to mix it together to have really good, strong relationships. So what we're going to do is have a look at these different statements and see if they're true or false. Now you'll see each one of them, and I can see you started to complete them for me, have got up and down arrows, so up and down thumbs. EQ can predict how successful someone will be in life. So do you think that's true? If it's true, pop the thumb up, and if you think it's false, pop the thumb down. This is not a test, it doesn't reveal who's put what results, so just pop those thoughts in there. EQ levels are fixed, not variable. What do you think? Income cannot correlate to EQ. Women naturally have higher EQ, it's in their genetic makeup, and emotional intelligence can be measured. I might have given that one away at the start, but anyway, we'll give that one a go. Okay, brilliant, lovely stuff, fantastic. So Chris, can you just confirm, we've got 11 on in total today? You can see that we've got 11 scored. Yeah, lovely, thank you very much. Okay, so let's have a wander through these. So EQ can predict how successful someone will be in life. Yes, true. We can predict how successful someone will be, and this is based on a 20-year study by a guy called Dr. Reuven Bar-On. And those of you that know a little bit about emotional intelligence will know that he's an absolute EI guru. So he's one of those guys that studied this for 20 years and said, what difference does it make? There's that intangible something, you know, but it's not quite like IQ. And that's where this came from. EQ levels are fixed and not variable. That one is false. Yeah, EQ levels are not fixed. However, I do need to put a little bit of caution in here because I was asked to work with somebody with a neurodiverse condition. So if we take something, for example, like autism, and the autism spectrum is really broad, as we know. Some people on the autism spectrum can work on their emotional intelligence and other people can't. So we just need to bear that in mind in terms of neurodiversity and diversity and inclusion in the modern world. but most of us can work on it. EQ levels naturally get better over time, which I always thought, because my dad actually has got much better over the years than he was when I was a kid. Now he's 60 and he says, oh, I don't get what you do, I don't understand it. And I go, well, you know, when you stop and you listen to people, or you make a decision and you think about how it's going to affect somebody else, that's where you're really starting to get it. So those are the sort of the conversations that we start to have when we naturally start to increase our emotional intelligence. Income cannot correlate to EQ, or there have been loads of studies done on this, and so I'm not surprised to see that we've got a divide here. So income can correlate to EQ, so that statement is false. So we know that the higher the EQ, the more likely you are to earn a better income in life. Women naturally have higher EQ, it's in their genetic makeup. I couldn't tell you how many times I've heard this. And I think this is because a lot of people perceive emotional intelligence to be empathy only, and it's not. There are 15 different rounds of emotional intelligence, and I'll flash those up a little bit later. But in there, empathy is one of them. So actually, women don't naturally have higher EQ. It's not in their genetic makeup. But what is fascinating is that in the studies, we know that women naturally have higher empathy and men naturally have higher assertiveness when we look at the spectrum. So there are subscales that they might have peaks and troughs on, but actually it doesn't mean that women are better at emotional intelligence than men. And emotional intelligence, as we said earlier, can be measured. So we use an EQ system to measure it. It's not been the easiest thing to develop, and there have been many different tools that have been put out there. One of the biggest things I'll encourage you not to do is to go on the internet and to search emotional intelligence tests, because it's a bit like those tests that you do when you're at school to find out, you know, put the first name of the last name and you find your ideal partner. Those sort of things, it doesn't work. So emotional intelligence measurement needs to be done in a proper way by a certified practitioner. Thank you so much for having a go at that with me. What is emotional intelligence? Well, we know that it's about the capacity to be able to recognise our own feelings, because we sense that in the word emotional intelligence. It's also about how we work and how we recognise the feelings of others. What we often don't realise, it's about things like how do we motivate ourselves, and also how we manage our emotions, particularly when we are under pressure. And so that's one of the things that we're going to notice in terms of how we're leading out of COVID at the moment. It also really heavily impacts in terms of our relationships that we lead with other people. So it's awareness of yourself, awareness of other people, working out how you manage yourself and how you have those relationships to build really strong, resonant leadership. So I've got up here a picture of two different leaders. I'm sure you'll recognise both of them. So we've got Donald Trump on the left and Barack Obama on the right. Now they say a picture paints 1,000 words. So I'll just give you a moment to stop and think, what is it that makes people talk about these two people in such a different way? Now those characteristics that you're thinking about are probably helping you to start thinking about emotional intelligence. So do they create resonance? Are they the sort of people that you think, oh, I would just love to have a coffee and a conversation with them. I just love what they espouse and their values. And if they are, that resonant leadership goes right through from whatever it is, in this case politics, but in an organisation, in a charity, whatever it is, it goes right through from top to bottom. And then we start to have devolved leadership where everyone in the organisation works in the same way. So using emotional intelligence right from top to bottom through an organisation is really powerful in terms of engagement. So obviously we start to think about, why does this make a difference now? Well, many of you have probably heard the terms VUCA. So the term VUCA is volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous. And we are leading in a VUCA world. The last 6 months, none of us could have predicted it was on its way. But 10 years ago, I went to a seminar on VUCA and what's it all about. And over the last 10 years, that's really started to play out massively. And there's more of it to come. Start to think about how things are changing and what we're noticing in different organisations. Mental health is really high on the agenda. I know today we've got Lorraine, who is absolutely fantastic at mental health on the call today as well. And she does a lot of great work in that field. That's been an increase, and rightly so. People are recognising the need for that alongside wellbeing in organisations. We're dealing with a pandemic. We've never dealt with this before, completely unprecedented times. We're starting to hear about those fears coming through, the socio-economic fears. Okay, Rishi Sunak provided a brilliant package for lots of people, but what about now? What's happening? How are we going to work through this? What's going to happen to the poorer people in our society? And then on top of all this, you know, we have this recent horrendous situation with George Floyd and Black Lives Matter. And it's worrying that it took that for us to start to go, yeah, this is an issue. But that's also part of leading in a VUCA world. We've got climate change, which sadly at the moment seems to have taken a bit of a back seat because everything else is going on. But if you think back 12 months ago, people were really starting to say, you know, we've only got 9 years left on this planet. What's going to happen? And then Brexit, which we won't stop and spend too long on today. So we know that we are leading in an uncertain world, which calls for people that have got strong, highly effective emotional intelligence to lead organisations. So I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of work, and this is starting to think about what problems are leaders trying to resolve right now. So pick a spot on here, and using whatever tool, whatever device you've got, what sort of problems are organisations, and particularly leaders in organisations, what problems are they trying to resolve right now? Nervousness of each other, yeah, isn't that true? Yeah, and I've really, so an organisation I work with, they went back into the office about 2 weeks ago, and they said it's really interesting because they were really looking forward to seeing each other. They sort of got there and went, what do we do now? So I think that there is definitely a piece of that going on. Redundancy and restructure, absolutely. Most definitely. Restructuring teams, I'm hearing a lot of this. And I'm hearing about the emotions that go alongside it from leaders. You know, how do I do this? I personally feel aggrieved by this. You know, any of you in HR will know this. You know, we've got these difficult emotions that we go through ourselves, but equally we've got a job to do for an organisation. Gaining sales and profit, yeah, most definitely. I'm hearing that too. Motivating your staff at a difficult time, and especially in the context. Yeah, very good stuff. Speed of change, absolutely. What else have we got? Maintain the organisational culture remotely. Yeah, that's fascinating. We're hearing so much more about how do we lead virtual teams. We're starting to see course demands going up for, you know, how do we do remote? How do we do leadership virtually? Keeping the costs down, most definitely. Things are changing. Uncertainty amongst employees, absolutely, and all of this driving things like fear and panic in the organisation. How do we return to the workplace post-COVID? Flexible working requests in the future, yeah, absolutely, and that's a really interesting one, isn't it? Because, you know, previously a lot of organisations have used the law as good ways to manage this and not to have to do it. I'm not saying that that's a good thing, but now obviously we've had the biggest work from home experiment ever, and people are now saying, well, actually it works, we can do this. And then there's some challenging conversations around, well, does it really work, or has this just been because we've had to? So there might be a mixture of both of those in there together. Balancing childcare, yeah, we'll have a little look at that in a moment as well. What does their market, I've got two there, what does their market, what does their marketplace look like? Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So how are we going to be then being able to operate in that particular situation? Providing a safe workplace, so again, leading back to the fears that are going on for people. Understanding strategy, I've been doing a lot around strategic leadership, pivoting, you know, you've probably heard that word yourselves. Cannot future-proof and we cannot plan. Yeah, or we can only plan as much as we know, definitely. Lovely, those are absolutely brilliant. So the reason I asked you to do that is because if we start to think about all of those problems that leaders are facing at the moment, there's a couple of questions that come to mind for me, which is, how do we start to work on those? Because they involve a lot of emotional intelligence. And secondly, what about the leaders? Who do they turn to? Because that's the thing that I'm hearing the most often is, oh my goodness, I can't tell people in my organisation how I feel. I want to, but I feel it will drive my fear into them. So it's also about giving them a safe sounding space. And this is where the leadership coaches come in and we do our magic stuff, because it just gives that extra safe external view where people can feel open and honest to talk about the situations and the issues that are bothering them. Now, with a little bit of magic, there you go, save that. I'm not sounding surprised. That's gone into the saved folder. Brilliant stuff. Look, okay, so what you really want to have a look at is what we now do with this stuff. So this is where you've come along to find out more about what happens to develop our emotional intelligence. So this model is Daniel Goleman's. Some of you might have heard about it before. So Daniel Goleman is, like Dr. Reuven Bar-On, the guy I mentioned earlier, they're the founding fathers of emotional intelligence. They are awesome in their work, loads of great YouTube videos and books. So I encourage you to have a look at those. One of the things that stands out for me the most about this model is that all change starts at the top with self-awareness. Now, when I work with people, I tend to hear them saying, yeah, but you don't know who I work with, or you don't know the environment I operate in. And I completely understand that. And that's where my empathy comes in. But what we do need to do is we can't change others. We have to start with ourselves. And from there, we then use those relationships to get better outcomes. So all change starts with the self. That's self-awareness. Let's go back to some of the problems that you popped up on that board a moment ago, dealing with redundancies as an example. How do I feel about this? What do I feel about having to make people redundant? It's part of my job. But then I know that, you know, there's Phil in the team, and Phil's got 2 kids, and what's going to happen with them? And then we start to get into that social awareness. How's that going to impact on others? Social awareness also not only includes other people as individuals, but it's also the social side of things, and also our social responsibilities as well, where we start to think about, you know, diversity and inclusion, you know, how do we operate within the environment, all of those things that we started to look at earlier about a VUCA world. Bring that down then on the left-hand side, we come back down to self-management. So I might be self-aware, I might know that actually in this situation I get particularly angsty, I worry about the redundancies, I worry about how that's going to come across. So my self-management in that situation is really important. So looking after myself, making sure I'm mentally sound, comfortable in making those approaches. And then marrying all of that together, and it sort of comes into a circle where we get great impact through our relationships. And this, if you then bring this to the bigger picture of how do we operate as leaders, this is where we make a difference. Yes.
Sorry, we can't see the slides.
Oh, thank you so much for telling me. My apologies.
You just can't see the slides.
Oh, well, that's okay. Thank you for telling me, because I'm talking through thinking you're seeing the same as me. Let's try that again then. There we go. Can you see that now? So mine says it's sharing. Is yours not saying it's sharing at the moment?
I'm seeing it.
It is?
Yeah.
Okay. So my apologies about that. So if you didn't have a visual with you, that probably wasn't so good. So let's just go through this again. So very briefly, all change starts at the top. All things start with that self-awareness, and then we start to think about, well, how do I work with others? How do I manage myself? And how does that all come together in order to have great relationships? And then, as I said, if we bring that back to the bigger picture of leadership, what does that mean for you in terms of leadership? Well, everything that you do has an onward impact, which we knew already. Daniel Goleman talks about 6 different leadership models, and I'm not going to run through them today because they're too much for an hour-long webinar. He talks about these 6 different leadership styles, and there are 4 that create resonance, where people feel connected and part of it, and 2 that are called dissonant leadership styles. And what's really interesting is if we come back to the core of what we talked about on that problem board, is that most of those tend to come from a fear base. And when we're in fear, we tend to use a dissonant leadership style rather than a resonant leadership style, unless we've gone through that process before and we've learned how to manage that, because it is a learnt behaviour. Anyone can learn it, but it doesn't often come by nature to a lot of people. So that's what we're having a look at as we work through this. Now I've got a little case study for us to have a look at. So we've got Jared here, and Jared with his little boy Noah is a communications director. He, like many other people, has been working from home, and his little boy, age 2, spends most of his day with Jared whilst his wife turns to work as a midwife. So their typical day looks something like going for breakfast, having breakfast together, a discussion with his PA about how the day is going to look, team catch-up, fitting some outdoor playtime with Noah, doing some MS Teams calls, virtual board meeting, making sure he gets some groceries in for the tea, and then swapping shifts with his wife on childcare. That's a lot. And this is a typical example of many of the people that I've been speaking to. Not all of them have children, but very typical example of a lot of the people that I've been speaking to, and their challenge, their normal way of working has gone out of the window. But it's not just a short-term period, and I'm very conscious that I'm not a stress expert, but I know enough about it. So when we've got short-term stress, we cope with it. Our body's set for the saber-toothed tiger scenario. You know, we can deal with it. Adrenaline, cortisol flows into our system, and we're there. We're ready to fight, flight, freeze, all of that great stuff. Now, when that happens for a sustained period of time, which we're looking at around about 3 months so far, people start to get long-term impact from that. So they start to struggle with things like decision making. They're struggling with their sleeping patterns, their eating patterns. They're not able to focus so clearly. Their communication strength and strategies and strengths go down, so they tend to get wound up a little bit more quickly. They respond more to situations in a more emotional way. So this is really important, because this is where we're starting to notice that some leadership behaviours are starting to leak into organisations, and not in a positive way. This is where emotional intelligence really matters right at this moment in time. So if we go back to the model, what do we know? We know that it's the person themselves that needs to be okay in order to be able to lead everyone else. So all change starts with you. So starting to think about that then, what I would like you to have a look at now is, she says, just having a quick look. Yeah, I'd like us to have a look at what happens in terms of Noah. So imagining you're Noah. Oh no, sorry, Noah. Noah's the baby, sorry. Imagine you're Jared. And what I'd like you to do is to just, in your chat box just now, just write in some of the emotions that you might be experiencing. So what sort of emotions do you think that you're experiencing? And if I can get you, Chris, just to give me the feedback on what pops up in there, that would be brilliant.
Overwhelm, anxious, spinning plates, anxiety, frustration, exhaustion, conflicted, busy work life, tired, anxiety, confusion, fatigue, determination to perform, losing confidence in ability, distressed, merging of work and personal life, stubborn, feels like a bad parent.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear the guilt one a lot. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for doing that. So what we know is, I mean, I've flashed up here just, you know, an example. I also had another character, which in terms of time I've dropped now, but I had another character, which is another one that I'm hearing of a lot, which is it's almost like the opposite end of the spectrum, the single individual who's really struggling because they've been working from home 3 months on their own with no interaction. So what we're doing here is we're getting a little bit closer to the emotions, because emotional intelligence is all around recognising yourself, what's happening, but also what's happening to others. So we're looking at this as if we're Jared, but actually if we start to think about that in a slightly different way, let's say we're Jared's leader, then being tuned into not only Jared, but, you know, Katie or Caitlin or, you know, Phil, whoever it might be, we've got all of these different people that we're leading. So being tuned into the emotions is vital. If we just come back to our own self-awareness again just here and think, actually, if I was Jared, what would I need to do first of all in order to improve my own emotional intelligence is first of all to really get close to our own emotions. And so we know that that's being brave enough to lean in. What we tend to find people do is to lean out and they go, I can't handle these emotions. And actually the brave thing to do is to lean in. And this is where working alongside somebody else can be really helpful, because we start to recognise, well, what happens when that emotion comes in my body? And it's really important that we recognise that, because emotions' first cues start in the body before they then come out. So we have a chance to manage that emotion once we know where it comes from. So I've put an example here, you know, on the left-hand side, I've written down the 6 prime emotions. You can debate those with me. That's according to Paul Ekman, who's an emotions expert. So the 6 prime emotions, and each of those emotions you feel in your body. So with Jared, for example, I'm all right. I'm a little bit stressed, but I'm doing okay. Now, if I'm his leader and I'm listening to that and I'm thinking, okay, clues. First of all, there's clues in the words, but for him, what's he experiencing? Jared himself would start to feel maybe a tense neck, a tight jawline, raised heart rate, maybe shortness of breath, knotted tummy, clenched fists, all of those different things are our first cues that we've got some stress coming. Now, why does that matter? Because you might think, well, if I've got stress coming, I'm all right, I know I'm going to be stressed. But actually, when you recognise it and you think, actually, I've got that stress on the way, and some of you might know if you follow me on LinkedIn, I'm relatively new to meditation. I've been doing it for about 4 months. But actually, that in itself is very good in situations like this. And you can start to train your brain, because what we don't realise is how great our brains are at learning. They've got this neural plasticity, which means that we can tweak and change them. So, for example, I might think, oh, I want a biscuit. And I go, yeah, but when I get that craving, it starts to come in my belly, and I think, no, I'm not going to go and have a biscuit. I'll go and have a glass of water instead. So we can train our brains. It's very, very clever. And that's the stuff that we're trying to do to improve our emotional intelligence, is get closer to our own awareness so that we can tweak and change through self-management the things that don't work for us. So I thought what I'd show you today is one of the techniques that I share a lot on my courses, which is around how we manage our thinking. Because our thinking drives our behaviour. So we talk feelings, thoughts, behaviour. That's how things work. So we've got the feelings, which we just recognise. The first clue that I'm not feeling great, or I've got anxiety or stress, or whatever it might be in this situation. Thoughts are the next level. So this is the ABCDE model, so called because as you wander through, you can see it's the ABCDE model. That's where it comes from. So Dr. Albert Ellis is a real fantastic guy. I strongly encourage you to go and have a look at his books and his websites and stuff as well. And he talks about when we are faced with a situation, we tend to go down this default route. It links with what I talked about before with the neural pathways. So we've got an activating event here. So Jared is there, he's got a meeting in 5 minutes, and Noah's started to have a good old cry. Now you can imagine, put yourself in empathy first of all into that situation, what that might be like. Challenging. So the belief that Jared's got is that I have to get through this, I've just got to power through, you know? And the other thoughts that might roll on from that, and I'm thinking of somebody I've worked with in the past, I've just got to, Zoe, you know, I'm an executive, that's what's expected of me. But actually that is a pattern of belief that then drives a behaviour, that then leads to more anxiety and pressure. And that's what I was talking about before, about that pressure coming in, and we tend to lean away, but actually we're better to lean towards it and say, okay, let's think about this belief. How does it serve me? So at the moment it doesn't serve him well, because he then feels more pressure that he should be able to cope, and then it's a compounding snowball effect. If, however, we stop and say, hang on a second, you know, what would happen if you had to postpone the meeting? Oh, no. Might be negatively judged, or I'm supposed to be a role model, or whatever might happen. So we can start to challenge the belief, but then it often brings up another limiting belief that we then have to challenge as well. Or we could say, actually, you know, what happens if you cut yourself some slack? You know, you've been working from home for 3 months, you've got a crying baby, a toddler. It's challenging, it's a difficult situation. Now, this isn't as simple as it looks, and I really have to emphasise this, because when I work with clients, they go, yeah, but you don't get what it's like, Zoe, and I go, okay, let's go through it. And what I tend to do is I end up moving a belief from here to here, to here, to here, to here, to here, and eventually we're then able to go, that's where the problem is, let's resolve that. And the individual has worked out a way within their own values that they feel that they can then move that forward. So the effect of filling in column D is that they have a different approach. They maybe have cut themselves some slack, or they've gone, do you know, actually, in the context of today, I'm going to bump that meeting, or whatever it might be. So they come up with different ways forward, which increases their own natural resilience as well. So there are a lot of win-wins from using coaching techniques, because we get better at managing our emotions, we get better at working with others, we get better at long-term resilience. So there are so many different wins that come in from there. So in the breakout rooms, I'll split you into some breakout rooms. You've got around about 5 minutes for this activity. So what I'd like you to think about is how might Jared's emotions impact upon other areas of his social awareness, self-management and relationship management. So we've talked about his situation. So we're here at the moment. He's self-aware, he knows that he's got some stressful situations, he's got his toddler to look after, he has a really busy day and a busy workload. What I'd like to do in this breakout room is to start to think about and discuss how does that impact his relationship with others, his awareness about some of the bigger issues, the sort of societal issues that we talked about earlier. How does it impact his self-management on a day-to-day basis, given the context of what he's working through? And how do you think that impacts his overall relationship management and social skills? So that's what I'd like you to talk about in the breakout rooms. I asked you if you would have a think just about what impact that could have on Jared's social awareness, self-management and relationship management. So what I'm going to ask you to do now is to capture that for us on a whiteboard again. Hey, we're getting great at this, aren't we? Let's give this one a whirl again. So let's see if we can just pop on here. What impact does it have? And if you want to just use some abbreviations, you know, so for the impact for social awareness, just use SA, or if you want to say self-management, SM, and the relationship management, RM, something like that. I could have made this even more interesting. We could have done pictures, couldn't we? Guess what the artwork is? Resentment towards wife. Oh, interesting. I hadn't thought of that one. That's really interesting. The resentment towards wife has just got me thinking about something else that I've been dealing with recently, which is passive aggressive. And so we do tend to see a lot of passive aggressive when we've got stress going on. So we might be absolutely brilliant to somebody's face, but actually not always holding that in when we're back with our nearest and dearest. Self-management, trying to be perfect at work might mean shows, frustrating with nearest and dearest. Oh, there we go. There you go. Yeah, absolutely. Passive aggressive coming through again. Isolation from friends. Interesting, as if we're not isolated enough at the moment. Value, what's more important? Yeah, absolutely, definitely. I mean, times like this do call into question, you know, am I doing the right thing? Do I want to be here? But then, you know, also that need to provide for my family, all of those pressures going on. Others may find, keep, I can't quite read that one. I'm just wondering if I can drag it across the screen, which I don't think I can. So apologies, I can't read all of them. So closer relationship with son. Oh, that's it. Yeah, that's a really nice bonus as well. Reassessment of personal priorities. Yeah. Be open with teams. Show you're human. Yeah, I'm hearing this a lot as well. And the conversations that I'm having with people are people saying, how much vulnerability do I show, Zoe? Because if I tell them that actually I was in tears last night, I maybe don't want to share that much. You know, so it really, and again, that's about having a safe space to talk to somebody about these things, isn't it? So we've got enrichment from others, feeling you're human, feeling that you support each other. Require more support from your employer, absolutely, yeah. Now is the time where employers should be asking, what can we do for you? But I appreciate that's not always easy. No support network, yeah, feeling disconnected. No time to yourself, not really succeeding in either word. Oh, and I'm hearing that a lot as well. Yeah, absolutely. The word failure comes up a huge amount at the moment, and really hard for people because we have never had to live through an experience like this before, and yet we're very quick to judge ourselves. And again, this is there's a lovely book called The Idiot Brain, and I encourage you to have a read of that because it talks about how our brain just takes over, and it goes, oh, well, you're a failure. Well, actually, you haven't stopped to consider we're leading through a pandemic, we're having to homeschool, we're having to do our normal everyday work, we're having to mask up before we go places. Context is completely different, but we don't allow ourselves that compassion as we work forward. Brilliant stuff, lovely. Those are wonderful. Colleagues all suffering similar issues. Some similar, some different. I'm hearing that quite a lot as well. So some saying, you know, it's okay for such and such, they haven't got kids. Actually, it's not always the same. So there's again compassion both ways as well for some there. That's ace, lovely. Save that one as well. Super stuff, thank you very much. So we're starting to see a pattern now about why this is really important to us, how important it is to be able to operate with emotional intelligence. Let's just get that one back there. And super stuff, lovely. Okay, so we're starting to see a pattern about why it's so important to lead with emotional intelligence. And I thought I would just bring this back to another horrendous situation that we had to deal with in the past, which was 9/11. And some of you might know that there were a couple of big stories at the time, and I apologise that I haven't got the names of these organisations. I wish I did. I did try and do my research, but I just couldn't find the names. So there were two organisations. One was known for being very insensitive and said, okay, this has happened, we've got to deal with it, when can we get things going again? And that was the message from the leader. Now, not long after that, a lot of people moved on, turnover was really high, engagement was low. we would sort of expect that. But what's interesting is that sometimes we don't necessarily think about that as we're going through this, because we're experiencing our own emotions, as we talked about earlier. Now, there was another organisation, and that organisation was brilliant. They did the stuff that we've seen a lot of this time round. So in their situation, it was the 12th of September, there was an email from I think her name was Marjorie Scardino from memory, of Pearson. And what she did is she sent out an email to everyone saying, you know, this is time for you, your families, you take priority and we are here for you. And when you're ready, we want you back in, but we don't want you back into work. We want you back in to talk to you, to understand and to learn from you. What do you need from us? Now, that organisation then went on to do lots of great work that was designed by those people who came back in, and they spent time together, they consoled one another, and they came up with an idea for fundraising. They decided to donate all of their profits from a day of trading, and every single person in the organisation was brought in because they created a common purpose and a common cause. And they did this and they donated all the money. And afterwards, they then came into work the next day, and they carried on doing what they do brilliantly because they found a common purpose. And this is where our emotional intelligence and leadership comes in, about leading through unprecedented times. We've got an opportunity now to say, actually, how do we want to lead forward? What is our purpose and how do we bring people together? One of the most overriding things I'm hearing from people is, actually, I'm so fed up of being alone, even though I'm not alone. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean together and physically connected, but it's about working out how we make people feel part of something again, because belonging is part of the human condition. We ache for it. And that's one of the things that we're missing at the moment. So how do we bring that together and provide that compassion and that leadership in order to take people forward? We've already talked about leading through this VUCA world, so that's where we're at the moment. I'm going to just bring us on to starting to think about this big picture. So leaders are leading in unprecedented times. We've talked about those hard emotions. Leading with emotional intelligence has proven to be the differentiating factors between the best and the worst performing organisations. And that's according to two different lots of research studies. Organisations that have invested in their leadership development of emotional intelligence include the US Army. They have a massive case study example of how brilliantly this emotional intelligence development worked for them. Got organisations like Google and Deloitte also deploying this as an everyday feature. Now, just before we wrap up today, I wanted to show you another model. So I'm very conscious that we've looked through the standard Daniel Goleman's model, which is absolutely brilliant because of its simplicity. However, when we use our EQ assessments, we use the EQI2 model. And I'm showing you this with copyright permission because it's very heavily copywritten, so you may not use it outside of this, and we can only use it for this context. So if I just show you briefly, you can see that there are different areas on here to what we looked at earlier on. So for example, we didn't see decision making. And this is where I think people don't necessarily connect the two together. Emotional intelligence impacts so many areas of what we do. So if I say to a leader, for example, okay, so let's take Jared. You know, Jared's making a really important decision. Well, if he's making a really important decision, then he's probably got some blurredness going on in his thinking at the moment, and that will impact how he's then progressing forward. So what we need to start to think about is how all of these work together. And when we do an emotional intelligence assessment, we actually do marry these up. So we compare this with this and this with this, and we say, okay, so when you're facing a situation, you've got to make a decision quickly. How does your impulse control affect maybe your assertiveness, or how does it affect your empathy? And we start to see actually that we've got a pattern for every single person. The other thing you'll see going around the outside are things that we didn't see earlier as well. So things like your well-being, your emotional and social functioning starting to come in here. Now, on our website, you can go on and this is all in the handout as well. You can go on and have a look at some of the sample reports that we produce for EQI2, and even better, EQ360, because our own view of ourselves are sometimes a little bit distorted. So we're able to get the view from how others see us as well. So that's the sample reports. You can have a look at those on our website. I'm conscious that we're at 11 o'clock, but I'm happy to take questions if that would be useful. If I just hand back over to, is it Chris or or Hazel, who's coming back on to do a Q&A session for us.
Everyone, well, that was fabulous, Zoe. Really, really thought-provoking, and I think we all learned a few things within Zoom as well. Excellent, fabulous, thank you. So, how are we feeling, guys? Are we feeling like, yeah, come on, let's get out there now? You leaders, what are our thoughts? Can we give Zoe some feedback, maybe as well, or some questions? Right. There's got to be.
I've got some questions in the question box. I know you can't see those, can you? I've just realised you're not co-host. So,
I can.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Really enjoyed it. Louise Bennett, our CEO, is online. She'll kill me for saying that, but everybody can see you anyway, Louise. Really enjoyed it. Sam, familiar with EQ, but good to think about it more in these times. Mary, thank you. Great interactive session. Tool simplicity. Yeah, that's great. So really good feedback, Zoe.
Great stuff. Okay, so if anyone would like to ask any questions, feel free to unmute yourselves and ask some questions away. And if not, then we will probably be wrapping up shortly. So,
yeah, just wanted to say thank you. Thank you very much, Zoe. Really good session. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much for joining us, Lorraine, and thank you for all the great work you're doing. I hear about it on a regular basis. I know, especially with Coventry, you do some awesome work. Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure. No, really enjoyed the session. Learned a lot from it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mary, I was going to ask just really a bit of comparison. What are organisations you're working with doing at the moment around this?
Oh, well, lots of different things. So predominantly we've got leadership coaching programs going on. So the one organisation I'm working with at the moment is looking at how we're doing. So we've got a leadership team, and they were due to be going through their leadership development program that was face-to-face, and they've gone, okay, everything went on stop. They didn't want to do it virtually, but they've gone, how do we support our leaders when they need us the most? So they've put one-to-one leadership coaching in for their leaders to support them. And that's a process that works because you've got individuals with individual needs. They've got somebody external that they speak to confidentially for an hour. I mean, it depends. At the moment, we're doing every other week, but normally it would only be once a month. But obviously the needs are quite high at the moment. So it really depends on what organisations need. And this is where, I think you and I have spoken about this before. It's really important that we have those conversations and say genuinely where's the need before we start to put in a solution.
Yeah, makes sense.
It does. Good question. And there's all sorts going on. I mean, there's in terms of the emotional assessments themselves, I'm finding that organisations are starting to talk about when do we do those later in the year, because actually if we do an EQ 360 right now, it's probably not the best context to do it in. So it will give a snapshot of how they're dealing in a stressful time, but actually in terms of the leader's overall leadership, they probably don't want an EQ 360 assessment right now because of the pandemic. But at the same time, you might use an EQ 360 later on in the year and use coaching now to work through the short term.
Yeah. And I was also curious just about sort of other sort of colleagues on the team. I mean, we've done a huge amount of work trying to put support in for our leaders, and I think we were a little bit reactive at first, and we've done a huge amount around mental health and trying to support others. But at the moment, it feels like, well, where do we go now? We have a direction, but it's like, are we just reacting, or do we need to just take a step back and pause, really?
So what's your information telling you?
Our information and talking to people out there is that actually some were okay, and I think we were thinking we were in a much different position. I think we were thinking, oh my God, everyone's in panic mode, we've got this, we've got people having to deal with things, but some people are actually quite content, and I think we just need to bear that in mind.
So that's great, and we are hearing a lot of that. Just bear in mind, it's probably not yet. It's not happened yet. So when people start, and I'm hearing this with another organisation as well, they've gone back in the office and they've gone, it wasn't quite what we were thinking. But that's probably because 80% of the office is still working from home. They're still working with kids. They're still, I don't want to use the phrase honeymoon period because it sounds wrong, but they're still in that. This is how we're coping with COVID. Yeah. When we come to September, and I say this as parents of 2 teens, I strongly think when we get to September, we're then going to get a, wow, things are now moving back because targets will start to be set again. You know, all the flexible and the allowances that we've had through this time are going to change. And I think we may find some kickback from people going, oh, I wasn't necessarily expecting that. You know, things have been, some people would say they've been cozy for them in some respects. You know, everyone's had the pressure off them, and then suddenly we've got to turn things back up again, but with emotional intelligence, you know, very, very carefully.
Yeah.
So I think September might be a time for us. But I'm happy, as you know, I'm happy to have conversations. I'm conscious that other people are observing your conversation.
Zoe, can I just say?
Yeah, of course.
Louise has had to go because we've got another call at 11 o'clock that we're on.
No worries, you carry on. How many have we still got on call?
It's just she's asked if you would be prepared to do a little session with our business coaches at the Chamber to sort of educate them on the importance of emotional intelligence. And then she's just said that me and Chris are obviously full of emotional intelligence. So she's very lucky. But yeah, she had to go, unfortunately, but she wouldn't mind perhaps having a chat with you about that.
Absolutely. Yeah, we can do that.
Okay.
No worries, of course. Yeah, more than happy.
Yeah. Okay.
Great stuff. I've lost track of our participants and how many we've still got on with us. So
we've got 9,
okay.
Including us. But if anybody's got any other questions they want to put forward to Zoe, obviously the presentation is going to be on our webinar section on the website for you to go back to. So Chris does that in a couple of days. So because he has so much to do, bless him, he does it in between. It's a day job. So yeah, but I really want to thank Zoe for that, because that was really inspiring, and it just makes you think about yourself internally and how you're dealing with your staff. And we're all humans. And Ona and I were talking earlier about being human, and our leaders are human. They have emotions